Welcome to one of the most interesting sessions at our summit, a fireside chat with private equity firm Northstar Group, whose portfolio includes Gojek, Bank BTPN, Alfamart, Thai Credit Retail Bank, APAC Realty, Indomaret, Bunda Medical Group, TiKi, Bank Jago, and I can go on. Since its founding in 2003, the Northstar Group has raised 5 private equity funds and has invested over 3.3 billion with its co-investors in more than 35 companies in Southeast Asia. Sunata, who is a co-chief investment officer and a member of the investment committee at Northstar, joins us today to take us through the firm's investment approaches and also the opportunities in Indonesia, and in terms of the overriding consumption theme, as well as the firm's strategy of value creation by providing more than just capital. Sunata, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Joji. Happy to be joining the sessions.
Yeah. So let me start with a big picture question, Sunata. Northstar recently closed its 5th fund at just under 600 million. This is slightly lower than the original target of 800 million, which you had set back in 2019. Your fundraising was heavily impacted by the pandemic. So how has the last 2 years been for you and Northstar in terms of meeting LPs, exits, fundraising, managing your portfolio? Just take us through.
Yeah, thanks. It's an interesting question. Obviously, the past 2 years was somewhat different than the earlier years, right? Let me ask from the fundraising perspective, we actually started marketing our Fund 5 in the 4th quarter of 2019. And we were pleased to see that some of our LPs supporting us, and we were able to do first close very early on in March 2020. Then we kind of switched gear because at the time COVID came to this part of the world, and we said to ourselves, let's focus our priority in terms of managing the operations of our portfolio companies, identify good investments, because we see a lot of, I would say, interesting opportunities in the market, and also some interesting theme coming out of COVID, right? So we did that, right, and we only started fundraising again practically in the beginning of 2021, right? And we closed the fund, raising close to 600. I think the question for us, does that actually enough to support our strategy? And we believe that's actually enough to support our strategy. And with a smaller fund, obviously there could be the faster deployment as well, which would enable us to actually do another fundraise sooner rather than later. Your second question. Well, typically the fund invests for a period of 5 years, right? But given that we've been very active, and this is to address your second questions or second part of your questions, how does the pandemic actually affect us? We've been very active in the past 2 years, actually. I think it is actually one of the most busiest time for us. We did deal, we exits, we also did capital market almost every month, right? In the past 2 years, right? All of that, a lot of it is actually going through online because we cannot meet with our LPs. When we did our due diligence, it's actually online. But there were several, I would say, significant investment and capital market activities that we did, including 500 million right issues of Bank Jago. We invested in Bunda. We list TAP. We exited Sen, Trimega as well just recently. On the digital side, as you already mentioned, we've been quite active. We invested in Moladin, we invested in e-fishery, advanced AI, and the list continues, right? So the past 24 months have been a very productive time for us. And we are balancing, at that time, our fundraising and our fiduciary duty to our existing LPs in terms of making investment, making exit, and also managing our portfolio companies.
Got it. I'll come to some of the other companies that advanced AI, Moladen later, but just a related question from what you mentioned. While private equity firms like you had sort of challenges due to the pandemic in terms of fundraisers, when we look at the VCs, some of the leading VCs, especially in Indonesia, they rode the pandemic boom. Their portfolio was like many of the tech companies rode the pandemic boom and sort of helped the VCs raise record fund. So in that context, do you think private equity firms like you bore the brunt of the impact?
Um, I don't look at it that way. As you know, that we, at least for our case, right, we invest in a growth equity, right, also buyout, right, but we have certain allocations of our fund to do startup or digital deals, and that model actually started since our fund 4. Our 3 main focus is financial service, consumer, and digital. So we have quite a balanced portfolio. And I think the number of deals and the number of exit that we have done in the past 24 months actually suggests otherwise, because my team has been very, very busy in the past 24 months, right? So I guess, at least in our case, it has been a very busy time in terms of executing our strategy.
Got it. You spoke about doing digital and tech deals. So in that context, it's very different from doing it as a private equity firm or doing it as a VC firm. So do you see Northstar going out and raising a VC style growth fund targeted at the tech companies that are growing both Indonesia and rest of Southeast Asia?
So far in our Fund 5, we have formalized our allocations of the fund, whereby we can invest, portions of our fund to a smaller ticket size, right? In our Fund 4, we started doing that, but we have not formalized that. And Fund 5 is we have a separate bucket to actually go into that investment, right?
Okay. So it'll be part of Fund 5 and no plans for a separate fund.
When if it makes sense, we'll raise separate funds, right? But as we speak now, I think our fund is actually also have that allocations. For the smaller deals, a lot of people don't know actually, but we've been investing in about 50 digital deals so far, right? And through various pockets that we have, right? And sometimes we come very early using, for example, what we call partners pocket, right? And the reason that we did that is, number 1, we get to know the founder, and number 2, keep us abreast of the industry development.
Got it. From the time that you closed your fund, which is in December, to the last, like if you look at the last 2 months or a slightly longer period, the world has changed, in the sense that we've seen a very steep sell-off in technology stock, especially in the US, and the ramifications are being felt in all regions, even in Southeast Asia. What do you think the implications will be? Will it be more rational valuations? Will it impact the upcoming IPOs? Do you think we'll see more down rounds, or will there be more M&As between companies? What, according to you, will happen?
I think as a fund manager, we always sit on both sides. Sometimes we are buying, sometimes we are also selling, right? So I guess, we need to be prepared in both situations and trying to maximize the situations. When valuations goes up, right, we have to focus on exit. When valuations comes down, right, then present us with opportunities to actually invest, right? Now, if you look at the digital sectors or the tech sector, given that the changes or shift in monetary policy, i.e. increasing interest rates, and increased interest rate meaning that investors is actually will assign a lower value because the discount rate will actually increase, right? So because of that, you also see some weaknesses on listed digital stocks, right? Particularly those that don't have a strong monetizations, right? Which is actually, to me, I would see it, that's a positive thing, right? It actually brings investors to become more rational. Obviously, valuation is also cyclical, right? It goes ups and down, right? But as a fund manager, we need to be prepared in either situations, right? And in this kind of situations, focusing on monetizations, unit economics, etc. That's something that we've been telling our portfolio investment as well. That is actually the things that we need to focus, right? That's for the later rounds. But for the earlier rounds, which is actually non-capital market or still the private market, right? I think valuation has not yet been impacted as severely as the later rounds, right? But again, the softness of the valuations or the multiples is actually give us opportunity to actually deploy our money since we just finished our fundraising.
Got it. But just a related question from what you said. Just a few months ago, all of us, the media, the fund managers, other companies, the whole ecosystem, they were celebrating for example, the listing of Bukalapak on the IDX as well as the IPO of Grab via a SPAC. And these were seen as validation for Southeast Asia's ecosystem, and they were the biggest listings in this region. But when you look at the current share prices, does that dampen the IPO mood in this part of the world, and will it impact the upcoming IPOs?
I think it's a question of supply and demand, right? From a secular trend perspective, right, the fundamentals remain intact, right? This is a region with young demography, right, increasing, income per capita, economic stability, and the list continues, right? But as you earlier, point, I mean, and as I said earlier, valuation is sometimes cyclical. So to me, it's just a question of valuations. I think there are a lot of interest, and every time I meet with a lot of people, they're always asking me, when is Goto IPO, right? Because they actually feel that this is something that reflect the Indonesian story. So imagine yourself as a local fund managers or as financial investors. Goto would become a proxy to Indonesian consumer, right? And the question is just supply and demand, and what will be the resulting valuations based on that discussions, right? So I think that's what's going to happen.
So how bullish are you on Goto IPO? Any additional details you can share on the Goto IPO? Because you're an early investor, been one of the earliest investors in the company.
I'm pretty bullish, right? But of course, my given that I invested in the company, right? Of course, I will say I'm pretty bullish. But putting aside that, right, as I said that, when it is listed, Goto gonna become one of the major big caps in Indonesia, right? Number two, it will be part of an index stock. The weighting in the index will be considerably high, right? And number three, if you look at Indonesian stock market, there are only still a handful of stocks that have digital angle, and Goto is actually obviously is one, right? So from that perspective, I'm quite bullish on this because it's just a scarcity asset, right? Valuations is actually on the separate box, right? As I said, that's supply and demand, right? But the IPO itself, it continues to be, I would say, attract a lot of interest.
Got it. You said valuations is a separate box altogether. So do you think that they've in public said in the past that they're looking at a valuation of around equivalent to what Grab was earlier, around 40 billion? Is that sustainable in the current scenario?
Unfortunately, I'm not in the positions to answer that because we're not doing the IPO. I think the management of Goto will be in better positions to kind of answer that. Yeah.
Got it. Just sticking to IPOs, one last question on SPACs. SPACs have underperformed or done really bad in the US. It's almost become like a curse word in the US. And we see local exchanges, XJ has approved, the Singapore exchange has approved several SPACs. IDX is looking at SPACs. So what do you think SPACs have to do differently in this part of the world to succeed?
I guess, we were looking at, or exploring, I would say, whether we should do SPAC, 2-3 years earlier, right? And then we were monitoring the market. And our conclusion is that at that time, number one, there were just too many SPACs actually coming out of this region. And number two, seems that in terms of the supply of the companies, is actually not that many that can go into that SPAC. Obviously, for it to be interesting, in my view, the company should be relatively large, right? Especially if you want to list in the US, right? Because if your valuation is just, $1 billion or $2 billion, it will not be large enough for that market, right? Whereas on this part of the world, I don't see significant, I would say, I would say that the level of aggressiveness of SPAC is actually somewhat slowing down in the past 1 year, right? Especially for Indonesia, I don't think we are actually, yeah, it is being talked about, but I don't see a very, I would say, aggressive push at this point yet.
Got it. I just want to shift gears a bit in the sense that, and look at some of the other developments in Indonesia and want your take. First, let me start off with, in terms of we're seeing a lot of these global funds, especially from the US, and some of them from Europe, coming in and leading many of the growth rounds for the tech companies. Many of them play in the same space as private equity firms like you do. And in that and there are lots of reports on how these firms are coming in quickly, closing deals very fast. So how do firms such as Northstar, get the best in terms of the growth deals and compete against these firms?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think people come to us because at least for Indonesia, they see us, we know the market very well, right? And especially in the areas of financial service and consumer, right? Just to give highlight on some of the digital investment that we have done and those that is actually doing very well. For example, we have Bank Jago, which is actually, you would argue, is actually one of the most successful digital bank from a valuation perspective in this part of the world.
Yeah, right? 15 billion, yes, yeah.
We have eFishery, and we know eFishery. Actually, we know the founders actually 7-8 years ago, and we continue to develop relationship. We put in small money, then we put in Series A, and then now it's actually the later series. We also putting additional money. Right, that is actually now becoming the largest agri-tech in Indonesia, right? We have Advanced AI, which did, significant fundraising, relatively significant fundraising last year. We know Jefferson, the founder. Jefferson is a very strong operator, but we've known him, 5-6 years. We have a business relationship starting from 5-6 years ago, and in fact, we helped Advanced AI to actually set up their business locally, right? So I guess being in this part of the world, right, our relationship is not coming also from capital, but also from the fact that we know the market. We can help them to grow, right? And the last point is that we also have quite a good ecosystem of our existing portfolio companies, and there could be a lot of synergies that can be developed between the digital companies and our non-digital companies, right? In terms of customer acquisitions, in terms of funding collaborations, in terms of cross-selling different products, right? And some of the digital companies actually comes to us to basically say that the reason that I want Northstar to invest because Northstar can provide some synergies to us.
Got it. So which means that when it comes to Northstar, people come to you because you bring in a lot more than just capital, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So just one or two more questions before we wrap up. And again, related to just what we now discussed, you mentioned e-fishery, or you mentioned Mola, then there's others like Ula in your portfolio. So does this also mean that when it comes to doing tech or digital deals, you are looking at coming in very early? That's more like a VC territory.
Yeah. That's precisely the carve out in our fund, that we can invest in the earlier deals, and that give us flexibility, right? The way that sometimes we invest a small amount, right, and then in the next round we're actually putting in I would say much more than the earlier rounds, right? And the earlier rounds is actually enable us to develop relationship, track the performance of the company, understand the business model more, etc. Right? And some of our investment is actually, we also came in at seeds round, right, through various pockets, right, and with that we cover the market, right? I mean, this strategy, our investors, our LPs have fully understood our strategy, and they are supportive for us to actually going on this strategy.
Got it. Because you mentioned the likes of e-fisheries, just wanted to ask you, do you see sectors like this, agri-tech, the aqua food space, as some of the emerging sectors in Indonesia that are undercapitalized, that have tremendous potential, be it startups or for investors?
I do think so, right? Because I think, Indonesia is actually the second largest aquaculture producer globally, right? But agriculture sector in Indonesia is actually, I would say, there are a lot of room for improvement, whether it's actually from the farming side or from the aquaculture side, right? There are just a lot of things that can be improved, and the digital enablement would provide a tool to achieve that. So yes, I think this sector should be an interesting sector.
Yeah, interesting. The other point that you mentioned was Bank Jago. In terms of valuation, yes, they're one of the most valuable digital companies in Southeast Asia. But a bigger picture question there I wanted to ask you: everyone is rushing to buy a digital bank in Indonesia. How do you therefore see the whole space, not specifically on Bank Jago, but the whole digital banking space in Indonesia?
To me, I would say that is not a surprise, right? I think in our investment in financial service, Bank Jago represent our version 3, right? Our version 1 was actually BTPN, that we cover, I would say, consumer, mass market, etc. Right? Our version 2, we invested together with Jerry as well in BTPS, right, which is covering the micro, very small ticket size lending, but in a conventional way, right? And we said to ourselves, in the banking sector, I think we need to go digital, because the cost to income in the conventional banks is actually sometimes too high, right? And in terms of customer acquisitions, right, digital is actually is faster, right? At the end of the day, time will tell, right? I think company that have a strong execution team will be able to compete better. Companies that is actually backed by a large ecosystem will also have a chance to be more successful, right? And for Bank Jago, I think those two boxes we have a tick.
Got it. We discussed financial services. We discussed the digital space. Quickly, just want your take on the consumer space. How do you see that?
Consumer space is actually still interesting. As you know, that we invested in Greenfields together with TPG, right? It was a buyout, right? But I think consumer space is also undergoing. I think I see a lot of interesting opportunities in the consumer space, but with, I would say, digital enablement, whether it's actually, from the cosmetics, from the groceries, from the, quick grocery, right, from the new retail, etc., right. So those are actually a lot of activities going on. It's actually, I would say, a cross between consumer and also digital, right? And that's normal, right? Because many of the businesses will have digital components, right? And that digital components will actually keep getting higher every year, right? But it's still a consumer business, right? It's just that they use digital as an enablement.
Got it. You just mentioned that many of the businesses will have a digital component. But if you were to look at it from the other side, any business that doesn't have a digital component today or doesn't digitalize will find it very, very tough to survive. And in that context, in terms of the number of small and medium enterprise businesses that Indonesia has, how big is it an opportunity for the investor community in terms of the whole digital solutions to millions and millions of small and medium enterprises in Indonesia?
Yeah, good question as well. There are a lot of startups is actually focusing on that, right? Trying to automate, for example. For small, medium businesses, right, the headache that they have is actually in terms of HR, right? How can I actually manage my HR more efficiently in terms of procurement, right? And in terms of accountings, right? Including, tax management, i.e., how I can, be more efficient in terms of processing my tax payment, right? And there are, I would say, a lot of startups trying to solve that pain point, and I think we invested in a couple of them actually.
Okay. We're coming to the end of our 30 minutes, and I want to leave our audience with one or two just big picture takes from you, because our theme is Indonesia. It is by far the largest market in Southeast Asia, whether it's digital tech or even non-tech. Or whether we look at it from a PE perspective or a growth fund or a VC perspective. I just want you to give us like your observations on Indonesia going forward, just a big picture view.
Number one, I think skills. I won't talk about the secular trend, right? I think a lot of people already knows about that, right? Number two, all the digital activities, a lot of people already know as well. So I just want to talk about one thing which maybe many people or may not following it, right? Which is actually the macro stability, right? So if you look at Indonesian export and Indonesian import in the past 24 months or in the past 36 months, there have been significant changes to value-added products downstream, right? And this is actually very important because our Indonesia trade balance now is actually much more stronger, even compared to pre-COVID time, right? We used to have, current account deficit, right? With this improvement of trade balance, current account deficit is actually getting smaller. In fact, I think 2021 was a current account surplus. What it means is that hopefully the currency is actually getting more stable, right? And a stronger currency is actually going to benefit international investors, right? That's number one. And number two, there are also, even though sometimes, kind of seems, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, but there are quite a lot of reforms and investment in the infrastructure as well, and also in terms of policy that should actually benefit fund managers, and asset managers going forward, right? So I'm quite bullish, right, over the next 2 or 3 years, given the very strong and macro and also the stability that we have seen in the past 24 months.
Is the Fed possibility of raising interest rates a concern for you from what you just?
The Fed is going to increase interest rate 5 times. I don't know with the current Ukraine and Russia, issue, whether whether that is still in line. I think latest it seems so. My understanding or our base case is that Indonesia might increase interest rate by 50 to 75 basis points, right? But the most important thing is that unlike other countries, our real interest rate is actually still positive and still actually at a quite attractive level, right? Because inflation in the past 2 years is actually very low.
Got it. Yeah. Interesting. I think we have taken up all the time that we have. Just quickly wanted to ask you, so in terms of the pandemic, we didn't touch upon it, but do you think that phase is past? Is it behind us for good, especially for when you look at a country like Indonesia?
Well, we don't have crystal ball. The short answer, I don't know, but I would guess that everyone in the world now is actually has already better prepared, right? In terms of healthcare services, in terms of vaccinations, etc. Right? I think this region is actually has done quite well. Indonesia has done relatively well as well, right? Since the Delta wave, right? We are now towards the tail of Omicron wave, right? And the impact is actually, I would say is actually quite mild, right? The number of cases went up, right? But now it's actually quickly coming down, right? So it seems that, we all have a better handle of the situations.
Yeah. Thank you, Sunata. We have gone past our time. Thank you for taking the time out to join us. We also look forward to I think as media, I think the Goto IPO will be the next big thing that we are all looking out for. And for our audience, I think it is great to have insights from you. And thank you for joining us at the summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Joji, and good luck with the summit.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.